Are you hungry for the latest news and trends from the internet? Welcome to What's Cooking on the Internet, your one-stop shop for discovering the hottest digital delights. Hit that subscribe button and let's get cooking.
Can we really learn from the weird and wonderful world of medieval animal illustrations? Let's dive in and find out. In a world where snails wield swords and elephants look like oversized golden retrievers, it's hard not to wonder, what's the deal with these bizarre and fantastical depictions of animals? For centuries, these artworks have been collecting dust in archives and forgotten corners of history. But with social media, they've taken on a new life, captivating audiences with their strange and wonderful pictures. People can't get enough of these images. The stranger, the better. But where do they come from? And why do they look so weird to us today? The medieval period, also known as the Middle Ages, spanned about 1,000 years, from the 5th century to the start of the Renaissance in the 15th century. Most of the animal depictions that have made it into the mainstream are from Western European manuscripts, often in the form of marginalia, small illustrations around the borders of the text. Books were for the elite back then, explains Larisa Grollemond, Associate Curator of Medieval and Renaissance Manuscripts at the Getty Museum. They're created for a really exclusive readership. A high-ranking nobleman might own a handful of religious texts, including books to guide personal prayer. That's where you see a lot of these funny animals and marginalia, she says. The artists behind the marginalia, known as illuminators, were a mix of monks and secular craftspeople. Grollemond says the purpose of marginalia has been debated by medieval art historians. Some say they're satire, others say they demonstrate the ideas of the manuscript, and others say they're just for fun. Medieval people were still people. They had senses of humor. They found a lot of the same things funny that we find funny, Grollemond says. A medieval person loved a poop joke, a fart joke, just like we do. It turns out that is an element of the human sense of humor that has not been lost over centuries. Why so many animals? The medieval preoccupation with animals comes down to how people lived during this period, says Julia Perratore, Associate Curator in the Department of Medieval Art and the Cloisters at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. People live their lives side by side with animals in a way that we do not, she says. The vast majority of people lived in rural settings and worked on the land, so that meant working with domestic animals. Images of knights warring against snails are common in marginalia, but historians aren't certain why animals turned up in any possible context where art would be made, from wall paintings and carved doorways to clothing and coats of arms. So why do the animals look so off? It's no secret that medieval animal paintings don't exactly resemble their real-life counterparts. But Grollemond explains that this wasn't a lack of skill on the part of the artist, but a stylistic choice. Medieval artists were not trying to depict animals accurately, she says. They're not trying to do photorealism. They're trying to communicate certain things about the world around them through the depiction of animals. The perratore points to a fresco house at the Met cloisters, which features a painting of a camel on the wall of a 12th century Spanish monastery. It uses flat forms, stylized lines, and bold colors. The artist is using the stylistic language of the day, she says. I think some people might look at this and say it's quite simplistic or the person who made it wasn't skilled. I think they're actually highly skilled. They are being creative with it, they're doing their own thing. This creative license is more pronounced in depictions of exotic animals. While some medieval courts had menageries, where wild animals were kept for show, most artists were unlikely to have come across a lion, elephant, or jaguar. The perratore says it was like a game of telephone, where a description becomes fur. They're from the truth the more it's passed on. It's not that they were unskilled, it was that they were making artistic choices based on the information that they had, she says. They're not trying to be supernaturalistic here. It's not their artistic goal. Evidence of these medieval artists' creativity can be seen today. Many of the dragons we find in pop culture, in the popular television series Game of Thrones, for example, are based on medieval interpretations. What about those human-looking eyes? That was intentional too. There is such a care, I think, among medieval artists and illuminators to make animal faces say something, and a lot of that does happen with the eyes, Grollemond says. The more human-looking animal depictions, like this one from a late medieval altarpiece in Switzerland, make for popular memes. I think they're going for humor in some ways, making things a little bit eye-catching, but especially in cases where animals stand in for moral exemplars. You're supposed to see yourself in that animal. This is particularly the case for animals depicted in bestiaries. medieval encyclopedias of real and imagined creatures steeped in Christian theology. The artists are using animals as examples of Christian lessons and to teach Christian theology. Essentially, so all of the animals are imbued with particular behaviors or characteristics that are given to them by God, grollemond says. Creatures like tigers, stags, pelicans, and panthers, like this one from a 13th century bestiary, were often symbols of Christ. Perratore points to a collection of Western European fables called Reynard the Fox, which was hugely popular in the late medieval period, was a great storytelling tradition in which animals essentially played out human social roles, she says. Animals became ways of telling stories about people, which is universal but was no less loved in the Middle Ages than it is today. In every Reynard tale, the fox is summoned before a court of his animal peers for his bad behavior, only to outfox them with his cunning. So what can furious snails, uncanny cats, and smiling lions teach us? Well, perhaps the Middle Ages weren't so dark, after all. We had 1,000 years of history where humanity didn't hide out in a cave while the barbarians ravaged the world. That's not what happened. What really happened was, we kept developing, we kept evolving, we kept creating, Playfulness says. This is an age that was supposedly barbaric and backwards and ignorant and intolerant, and yet the way they depicted animals is sweet, beautiful, playful. We expect it to be dark, and it's so bright and lively and dynamic. Animal imagery, like this much circulated image from a Bavarian coat of arms, was often playful. While Playfulness says art historians are likely rolling their eyes at his memes, perratore and grollemond are big fans of his Instagram account. The sheer inventiveness of a lot of what we echo under in these memes is really a source of continual delight, perratore says. I think it's important for people to be exposed to art of the past, no matter how they encounter it. It does help to humanize the past. Grollemond thinks the artists behind these memes would have enjoyed them too. It is my fervent belief that medieval people would have loved the internet. The repurposing of their art I think would have been very gratifying to illuminators, she says. On his desk, Playfulness has a small paperweight, which he had specially made. On it is written a Latin expression, which translates to, "The soul is rejuvenated with laughter." I think the world needs a little bit more lightheartedness. It needs a little more cheer, he says. If I can go back into an age that is supposedly so dark and violent, show the lighter side of that, who knows? Maybe it'll make people reconsider the age that we live in and see some of the positive things.